This is lesson 16, and today we're going to talk about group operations using pandas. So as usual, we're going to go to the lessons directory in our repository, go down to lesson 16, and click on this raw link, copy the URL, open up Terminal. Just open up a new tab here. Go to SIO 209 lessons, and then curl dash capital O, and then quotes. We're going to download that lesson 16. And then source activate Python 3. And Jupyter Notebook. So we can go down here to lesson 16. So pandas, we've seen a lot of stuff already you can do with pandas in terms of you can import CSV files and Excel files, and you can slice these in different ways. You can do all sorts of operations to get information from your data frame. And you can plot your data frame too, either using internal pandas functions or more often using matplotlib or Seaborn or other options. But one of the powerful things that pandas also has is ways to take a data frame and kind of pivot or sort of condense the data in different ways. You can average data according to a certain category, or you can turn rows into columns and columns into rows and make a new series. There's all sorts of ways that you can do things to your data frame to get the information that you want in a format that you want. Some of you have probably used, you've probably all used Microsoft Excel, but maybe you've used pivot tables in Microsoft Excel. So Pandas has something like that, and there's a number of other features. So we'll cover some of these today. My goal is not to make you experts on all these things because it gets kind of complicated, and you really just, you kind of need to be aware that these things are available to you, and then I'll give you some examples and kind of give you the tools that you would need to be able to use these in your own work, and you'll probably have to do some trial and error to get it working, but that's pretty typical. So so first of all, as usual, we're going to have to import some libraries. So we're going to just run this command. We're going to use pandas, numpy. I think we don't need this one sys, but I don't want to leave that out. So matplotlib, Seaborn, and as usual, we need this matplotlib inline command to make sure that any plots that we make will be rendered in the notebook. We're also going to set max rows equal to 20, so it won't show any more than that. So another thing that let's do, and I haven't been doing this last couple lessons, is let's clear our output. So we'll go up to cell, current outputs, clear. Oh, sorry, we want all outputs, sorry. All outputs, clear. And we can run these again, although they should be run, but okay. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you group by, but before I do that, we need to get our data ready for that, and I'll explain what I mean. Basically, we want to do some munging to kind of change the index and transpose and reset the index and do some things that will allow us to do the example. So we're going to import these survey scores from 2015. Again, we've used this file a number of times. If this command doesn't work for you, raise your hand and we can get it working. Does that work for everybody? Okay, good. So that just means that we had this file that's in the data folder that's in the same level as the lessons folder, which is where we currently are. So what we did was we did this read CSV function of pandas with this file path, and we said index column equals 0. So the first column 0 of that CSV file is our index, and by default the first row is going to be the column headers, and then we have all these data here. So there's a few things we want to do. First, we want to remove the index. So one way we can do this is by saying df.index.name equals none. Sorry, I should. What we really want is the index. We want to remove the index name. So df.index, so df is just the name we chose for our data frame. df.index is the index of the data frame, which is this whole column. But it has a name which appears up here, which is inherited from your data frame. It might be empty. There might just be an empty, just your file might start with a comma with no header for that first column. But in this case, we do have one. And so we're going to remove that. We're going to remove that index name. So that index has a property called name, and we're going to store that as none. So now we've removed that frame, that value, that index name. The advantage of that is that when we transpose the file, which we're going to do next, we don't have this index name that doesn't actually apply to what the new index is going to be. So we're going to transpose that data frame. And now we can see that we have indexes, which are these de-identified numbers corresponding to the students, and then we have all these columns. So the advantage of, and the other thing we can do is reset the index. So actually, let's do one more thing. I'm just going to do this on the fly. So we can, after transposing, we can do df.index.name equals student. So, and to make sure that we didn't do anything out of order, let's do one more thing. We're going to restart the kernel, and then we're going to run everything up to this point to make sure that everything's good. So we're going to run all above. So what I did was I went to kernel, restart, and then run all above. So that we've now done this part where we remove the index name, and then we're going to transpose, and then add a new index name corresponding to student. And I could have actually skipped this step because I was going to rename it anyway. But now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to reset the index. What that's going to do, and we'll see this again in a little bit later, what that's going to do is give a new index starting from 0, and it's going to take the current index and make that a column. So that's now going to be called student, and we now have a new index that's just numbered from 0, which is the kind of default style. What this allows us to do is to take the information. It's one way to get the information from the index into our data frame, right? And depending on what we're going to do next, that might be valuable. Another thing, yeah. So because of the way we did this, these are still being recognized as objects and not values. But yeah, so what we want to do is convert these columns now to integers. So we've seen this one before. We can say first we're going to specify some the column. Basically, we want to specify the columns that we want to be numerical. And one other thing we can do is, you can see how this text is kind of bleeding over to the next, like you can't see it all without scrolling. One thing we can do is just hit enter, and it will, the notebook will automatically indent so that these are aligned, so we can easily see that these are part of the same list. And certain characters, including like a comma, will allow us to form a new line in Python. Not everything will do that. An open parentheses or an open bracket. You can have an open parentheses in your code for whatever, based on what you're doing, and then you can make a new line, and it will let you do that. You can always do this too. You can do a backslash, and this will allow you to interrupt your code and continue on the next line. There are certain certain code styles like require you to only have 80 characters per line, for example. Python doesn't have those requirements, and some people they just let the text editor or the notebook do the formatting for you. But anyway, just a little syntax lesson there. So what we're going to do is we're going to define all the columns that are score columns that have numerical data, and we're going to convert those columns. So we're going to do this this sort of masking style of indexing. We're going to pass a list of columns to the data frame, and then convert those to type int, and then store those back as themselves. So now all these columns that we specified have now been converted to integer. And the advantage of this is that we can now do mathematical operations on these, and if they had remained as objects, that wouldn't work very well. Okay, so we can now get into this this first bit here. So I'm going to pause the video for a second.